CS10X tutorial 10 question 2, exception handling. For this question we are going to play with the HTTP GET function that takes in an URL and returns the contents of the web page specified by the URL. So for example we can do HTTP GET google.com, and as you can see the HTML code of the web page is displayed. We can also try to do HTTP get google.com/CS10X, and this web page doesn't exist, so we get an HTTP error as a result. Or we may try to do HTTP get blah blah, and blah blah is not even a proper URL, so we will get an URL error exception. So the problem here is this return tries to return the contents even though we may not be able to access them during some problems with the URL. So instead of directly returning the contents, we are going to try to return them. So we will write this. Now the question is, why don't we simply return an empty string if the URL is not accessible? Well, one reason could be that the web server itself sends us an empty string as a response, but that's not very probable of happening in practice. However, if we do catch exceptions, we may be able to distinguish between different kinds of errors. Like here we are going to distinguish between HTTP errors and URL errors. So these are the exceptions that we are going to catch. So we accept URL error as error and we raise it again as value error. And we also catch HTTP errors and rethrow it as internet failed. Okay, so now if we run this again, we can do a HTTP get of blah blah, and you see that now we are getting a value error. And we can also try to access google.com/CS10X, and in this case we again get a value error, but we would like to get an internet fail exception. So the problem here is that HTTP error is a subclass of URL error. So when we have an HTTP error, it will match here as URL error. So this value error will be thrown. So to avoid this, we have to first catch HTTP errors. So now we can do this again, and as you can see, we got an internet fail exception. We are now going to use HTTP GET to define a new function, download URLs, that takes in a list of lists, and each inner list contains two elements. The first element is the name of an URL, and the second element is the name of a file text where we want to download the contents of the URL. So to do that, we are going to iterate through this list. And first we are going to try to get the contents of the URL, and that will be URL 0, and then try to write the contents to a file text. And here we are given an example of how to open and write to a file. So open is the function that tells Python to open this file name. File name is a string representing the name of the file as it appears on your computer. Then WB means for writing and binary. Then as my file means we can use the variable my file to directly operate on the file. And here, as you can see, we write to my file a variable contents, and contents is nothing else than what HTTP GET returns. However, as you've seen earlier, HTTP GET may raise exceptions, and if that happens, the whole execution will stop. So instead of doing this, we are going to try to access the URL, and if that's successful, then we can then write to the file. And if we cannot access the URL, so we are basically accepting internet fail exceptions or value error exceptions. So if that's the case, we are just going to print a message instead. So let's say could not access URL, and let's say we also want to return the exception, so we catch the exception as error, and then we print this message. So now so our file name is URL1. Now we are going to use HTTP GET to write a new function, download URLs, that takes in a list of lists, and each inner list contains two elements. The first element is the name of the URL, and the second element is the name of a file text where we want to save the contents of the URL. So we are going to iterate through URL file names. And then we are going to try to get URL 0. So we are going to call HTTP GET with URL 0 as an argument. And then whatever is returned, we are going to write on a file. And here we are given an example of how we can write to a file. So basically open tells the Python interpreter that we want to open this file name, which is a string representing the exact name of the file as it appears on your computer. Then WB tells we want to open the file for writing, and B is binary. Then as my file means that we can use the my file variable to directly operate on the file, and here we basically write contents, this variable, to my file. And of course contents is nothing else than the result of HTTP GET, and file name is URL1 because in the list of URLs the second position will contain the name of the file name. However, as we've seen earlier, HTTP GET may result in an error, and if that happens, as you probably know by now, the Python interpreter will crash. And we would like, in this case, to continue to access other URLs even some of them fail. Therefore, instead of doing this, we are going to try to get the contents of the URL. And if that's successful, then we will write to the file. And if not, we can print a message. So we are going to catch exceptions like internet fail and value error. And then we are going to print a message. Let's say could not open and we also print the error. Okay, now let's run this. And as you can see here, we can't open, this is the empty string here. Then could not open this because it doesn't exist. And the last one didn't end up in an error, so we don't see any message on the screen.